Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. This is the Brox and Max channel. This channel consists of all sorts of crap. I haven't quite dialed in exactly what this channel is actually about. You got antique trucks, you got working on trucks, you got working stuff in the garage, truck show stuff, and basically some repair work on our machines that we run in our business. This thing in particular, just bought this. What this actually is, it's a Rheinco brand hay or straw blower with the regular 50 to 70 pound bales. It's not a round bale spreader or anything like that. It's just basically, if you are a privy enough contractor to own one of these, they are pretty handy to have, especially at the end of a job, to do reclamation work or leveling around a house and you have to final grade and put seed down and hay or straw. This is a perfect machine for it. We've had one for gotta be 20 years at least now. But this one in particular I just got my hands on after trying to get a hold of a couple of them, this being the second one. The first one, some scumbag on Facebook Marketplace decided when I was 3/4 of the way there in my 3-hour journey to say, oh yeah, about that, I forgot somebody put a down payment down. But that's another story. But this one is actually in better shape, and it is diesel. That's what we were kind of looking for. The other one that we have has a 4-cylinder Wisconsin gasoline engine, which was practically everything that they ever did. Back in the 70s, 80s, that's what you saw. They made thousands of these units. A lot of them were gasoline. The bigger ones, some of them they have their own trailer built setup on it, and they probably had a bigger motor like a Deutz or a John Deere diesel. But this one's got a little Kubota. Now, about hay blower number 2, not that the guy that I bought it from was dishonest with me, because there really isn't, you can't really lie about something this simple, let's call it. You got practically, it ran when I got there. He gave me the spiel that he had 2 or 3 of them at one particular time, and he said he replaced the muffler on this one. Well, when we made a deal, and I'm happy, no complaints there, but this new muffler, I'd like to know when the new muffler was actually put on, because when I got it here, I noticed that there's already spider cracks, small pinholes in it, and it's kind of tricky. Even though this is a Kubota engine, it doesn't have an exhaust manifold. It's exhaust manifold and muffler tied all into one. And it's specific to hay blowers. So I have to make a decision whether I want to just delete the muffler that came on this machine and put on like a generic exhaust manifold, and then I can go to somewhere like Tractor Supply and get a generic muffler for it, or have to pony up and spend what I see as $500 online to get something similar, but it's not quite exact, because other than Rheinco, there's other hay blower manufacturers. There's Finn, and I'm sure there's many others, but the real leader in the industry nowadays is the brand called Finn. So I know that they make more, like even in hydro seeding and all that. So I guess this video is basically, we're going to do a walk around on this machine, and I have to do a small repair that maybe somebody can find handy. So keep tuning in, and maybe you'll learn a thing or two. So this is the tricky muffler that came off of this machine. It's mounted upward like that. The muffler is actually above, and here is where the exhaust manifold should be, but it's built in to this whole deal. So when you flip the back side over, you can just tell it's really direct bolted to the head of the engine. So it's kind of like a 2-for-1. I have not seen anything spec'd for this particular muffler other than the hay blower. Whether Finn has it or Rheinco or anything with this Kubota engine with a straw hay blower spec, this seems to be the thing. Well, when I took it apart, so when I inspected it a little further, it was leaking pretty good around this spot here. Actually, I'll show you how it looked. It had this downspout hooked to it that goes all around the fuel tank and down. So when I removed that to inspect it a little bit further, you got, this was wore out a little bit, leaking, and then right under here is super thin. So my thought was, if I can somehow gingerly take this apart, cut this out, here's what the internals look like. I have to repair all of this tin here, and then repair the tin work around here to make it a little bit stronger, because there's quite a bit of leverage on this little piece of pipe holding this huge spout of exhaust. So I'm forced to make a decision. I either fix this and spend about a day fooling around, because I'm sure I'm going to be chasing holes probably to about here, which I'm expecting to do, or I just buy a new one, or I just do the normal, I'll just delete this completely and put an exhaust manifold on it with a regular generic muffler that you can get from any particular farm store or wherever. Truck place, it doesn't even matter. So while the decision-making process was happening, I decided, because the muffler came off relatively easy, and me not knowing if I was going to keep the muffler, I had to remove all of the exhaust manifold, or not manifold, but the muffler studs. Some of them are super long, and then some of them are just, let's say, medium length. But both of them are too long for putting on a regular manifold. So everything kind of went good, but you know what? There's always the one. The one out of the 8 decided that it was too thin. I was trying to crank it off with some pliers, and tink, it just broke off. So this video is basically, let's see how easy or difficult it is to get this removed. Now there is probably about 3 ways you could remove it. You can try with a stud extractor, which I don't know if I have enough meat on there to be able to grab it and spin it off. You can weld a nut, or get an oversized nut right there, and then weld on the inside of the nut, and then grab this stud. And with the heat of the weld, it kind of does this, I don't know, this expanding contraction type of thing. I don't particularly care for it, but it does work, because while this is heating up, this is also expanding, which is making it difficult, I feel, to spin this out. It's not like this is shrinking down in the head and it spins right out. It's doing some molecule movement to maybe jar any type of corrosion or rust in the threads, and hopefully it will spin out. Now the third way, if you don't feel comfortable with the nut, you can always put a big washer on there, weld as much meat as you can on this stud, and then weld your nut to the washer so you have a socket or a wrench to be able to spin that off. I don't know what I'm actually going to try yet. I'm going to try a stud extractor first, and maybe this video won't be that awful long. You see that it's only about maybe 3/16 sticking out of the head, which is, luckily for me, a good thing in what I have to do, but I don't know if the stud extractor will work. The other thing you can do, in case the stud extractor and me welding a nut on there, you can't give up on it. You might have to weld 5 or 6 nuts or 5 or 6 attempts to try to get that out. But if you start running out of material, because all it does is it breaks off some more, is you may have to drill it. Now, I have gotten really lucky in the past to be able to drill that out in other things, whether it be trucks or equipment or whatever, not particularly through the head, but any type of broken bolt scenario, I've usually gotten pretty lucky. So I'm not necessarily afraid of whatever end result will be. I'm just trying to get it done as quickly as I can and maybe as efficient as I can. I don't want to spend 2 days trying to figure out how to get that out. So I'm going to go get a stud extractor and go from there and see what happens. After further digging in my toolbox, this is what I've found so far. This is an 8mm or 5/16 stud extractor. You can see that it's got ridges in there to go backwards to hammer it in there, and then potentially spin it right out. You got a 3/8 square drive, which is pretty handy, or hex, whether you want to put a ratchet wrench on there or just a regular wrench to do whatever you're doing. Now, if anybody knows of any other brand particularly better than Irwin, not saying Irwin's bad, but if there was a better brand out there and you've had better luck with these, feel free to comment. I'm more than happy to hear somebody else's good luck story, or hey, I feel my brand is better. I'm curious, how many brands out there make stud extractors? So I'm going to start here. Uh-oh. Well, it may have been the end of the story. Let me see if I have anything smaller than an 8mm, because that is definitely a lot smaller. Give me just a second. Well, apparently that's all that I have is 8mm, and I also have a new set of Irwin in my toolbox, and that's the smallest it goes, is 8mm. But what I did find in my toolbox, you can always depend on vice grips, and ironically enough, Irwin makes these too. I'm not even going to attempt in this particular case to try it, even though I have enough meat on the stud with the vice grips to do that. I just don't think it's going to work out. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'll try to get, this is metric probably, in between 1/4 and 5/16, so I'm assuming maybe a 6mm, 7mm stud. I'm going to probably go upstairs and get a either 3/8 or 7/16 nut and see how good that fit is, because like I said, you want to be able to get quite a bit of weld in between the stud and the nut, so there's good penetration from the weld in between both. And then naturally, if you have a big nut on there and you can get a nice hot weld, that in turn makes that hot to hopefully be able to warm it up, and then it cools down and you can just spin it out by hand, hopefully. All right, let's see what 7/16 looks like when you put it over it. It's got quite a gap in there, not too much. I did bring a 3/8. Let's see what that looks like. So that's a little less. I don't think I have enough spacing in between the stud and the nut to be able to get enough weld around the outside of this stud. I'd be more depending on just the break point on this stud. I don't know if that would work, so my thought is to try it this way. Now you can, like I said in the beginning of the video, you can put a washer on to start with, so you don't have so much depth that you're trying to wire feed in there. It's basically right at the surface, and then you can weld your nut. But in this particular case, I do like the 7/16 nut, but I don't like the 7/16 washer. So now when I put the 3/8 washer on there, to me that's a nice gap in between it all. Just hold it kind of without burning your fingers, I guess, and put a nice weld all the way around there, and then you weld a nut on top of that. You don't even have to weld the nut fully, just put 2 real good tacks on it and then see if it'll spin out. So what I'm going to do, I actually like this idea better. I'm going to use the washer. So I'm going to plug in my welder, put a good bead on there, and then weld the nut on and hope for the best. All right, so I got this new tip on my welder because I do not want to mess this up. It's kind of like a one and done type of thing. If you start having a cold weld on it, it's just not going to work. So you got to make sure that you have a really, really hot penetrating weld on there. I have the welder turned up to roughly 1/4 inch thickness for my 1/8 inch thick washer, just to make sure that it really digs in there. I'll just put my pliers up kind of close just to steady it, and then pull the trigger. Got a good tack on there, just going to weld all the way around it. Then what I'll do, 3/8 nut will work. Tack that on. Alright, so you see it's still kind of glowing. Just going to wait for it to cool off for a few minutes and try to turn it, break it loose, see if it'll spin out of there. Well, you can just see it went pretty good, even though it didn't sound that healthy welding on there, because I guess I should have thought about sanding off or grinding off the zinc plating on these new washers. But regardless, I got a good few welds on there, so it should, in theory, come apart, or it'll just shear right off at the head, and then I'll have to drill it out. Oh, there we go. Alright, so it's still hot. You can't touch it with your fingers, but it's not so hot that it's going to spin the weld right off. And I don't have a lot of time. This must be the right temperature because it's not even squeaking, squealing or anything. Spin that right out before it cools off, and then it gets stuck in the head again. Should have used a ratchet wrench, but I really wasn't sure what I was going to get myself into. There you go. Whole thing came out. You could see that the weld actually filled in almost all the way around on this gap here that I was telling you about. So I know that I had really good penetration in there, and I just tacked on a few spots to get that nut. It's not pretty, but it worked. So now I can carry on with cleaning up these flat spots to get it ready for exhaust muffler, manifold gaskets, exhaust gaskets. Let's call it exhaust gaskets for now. So this is probably going to be a restoration job in our particular case. By the time you get done DAing and sanding everything down, because this is sat outside, I think its whole entire life. It runs good. It only has 150 hours on it, but cosmetically, it's just ugly. So probably going to end up pulling the motor and sandblasting the whole thing, priming it, painting it, and having it ready by spring. Because we do have another one that we're using right now that's gasoline powered, but that's going to be replaced with diesel power. Nothing better than diesel. So anyway, that's it for this episode. I'm happy that I didn't look like an idiot. I'm glad I didn't have to do it 5 or 6 times like I explained. It just worked out good. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. I don't know what this channel is going to evolve to, but I'm having a lot of fun making videos, and hopefully you guys enjoy watching them. And I will keep posting them as long as you keep watching them. It'll be truck related, equipment related, truck show related, but this time of year it's middle of December, so there's not going to be much truck shows unless I go down south, and that's just not going to happen. I got too much of that to work on. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next one.